Welcome to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast, powered by StatRoute.com. And now, here's your host, Ryan Skullroot.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullroot. I am your host. I am doing a solo show tonight. Justin could not make it tonight, so it is just me for our first Infirmary report of the 2019 season. We usually have one of these every year where there's just a mass amount of injuries, and it just so happens to be that week 2 this year happens to be that week. So couple announcements real quick. We would love it if you guys could go to patreon.com/SkullKingNation. Check us out there. We've got a page set up there for you guys to be able to support us, to get a little extra in terms of advice from us. You'll be part of our Slack channel to get advice straight from our experts and our analysts on SkullKingFootball.com. And in compared to if you're part of our Facebook group or Facebook page, where a couple of our guys can get in there every once in a while, but a lot of it's just kind of a group thing with everyone kind of chiming in. By joining our Patreon page, you'll actually get the support from our analysts directly, and be able to hear from them pretty quickly. They do a pretty good job of responding. So also make sure tonight is our waiver wire madness episode. Tomorrow we will have a waiver wire article up with a bunch of additions from our writing staff as to who you should add to your team for this next week. I believe that's all of the announcements. So if there's nothing else, nope, we're good. So why don't we go ahead and hop into today's headlines?
Today's headlines.
And leading off the headlines is my fantasy quarterback of the year, Mr. Ben Roethlisberger, the guy that I had been pumping up so much, thinking that he was just going to have this phenomenal season. And as it turns out, he now needs elbow surgery and is done for the season, Mr. Ben Roethlisberger. So he's got Mason Rudolph taking over for him. In terms of what this does for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, I don't necessarily like it for Juju. I think it's obviously going to bring him down a little bit. Connor, I think it brings him down a little bit as well. Washington, this could be a boost. Rudolph and Washington were teammates at Oklahoma State. They showed a lot of chemistry in the preseason that was against 2s and 3s. We'll see what happens now that we're actually into the regular season, and Rudolph is the starter. I hope that this means that this is the end of Dante Moncrief. And then Vance McDonald, obviously he gets a boost. Mason Rudolph really targeted him a lot. Vance McDonald, I believe, was the number 4 scoring tight end this last week with, I want to say it was 7 catches for 38 yards and 2 touchdowns. So overall, if you have Ben Roethlisberger in a single quarterback league, you should be okay. If you have him, like me, as your only quarterback in a super flex league, well, you're in trouble, and you've got to spend big now on the waiver wire or in trades. So moving on to story number 2, another quarterback injury. Drew Brees has a torn ligament in his throwing thumb. He needs surgery, likely out 6 weeks. That's the initial estimate in terms of how much he is going to miss. So Teddy Bridgewater becomes the quarterback for the Saints. And in terms of what this does for the Saints offense, Michael Thomas may not get much of a drop-off. He's going to get a little bit. He's not going to probably have as many explosive plays. Kamara, I think it's going to be a little bit of a drop. I still think he's going to be used in dump-offs. He's going to be the main guy in the run game. And how the tight end Jared Cook is going to be involved, Jared Cook actually had 7 targets in this last game with Teddy Bridgewater at the helm. So I think that this could be better for Jared Cook now, at least for a few weeks with Teddy Bridgewater. I think he'll get more looks this way. Drew Brees, while he has targeted tight ends a lot in the past, that was back when he had Jimmy Graham and even Ben Watson. So the last couple years, the targets for tight ends has gone down and down and down. So with Teddy Bridgewater in there, I think that I believe that Cook is going to get a little bit more work going on. Latavius Murray almost had no work in this game against LA. So I really don't think Latavius is going to get a whole lot of work. I think that they need to keep as many of their athletic players out there as much as possible. And so I see Latavius Murray really taking a backseat, almost down to a running back 3, or not even a flex play at this point. Until we see otherwise. So like I said, Drew Brees out for probably 6 weeks. Could be longer. It all depends on how the surgery on his thumb goes. So moving on, story number 3. Pat Shurmur has declined to officially name Eli Manning as the Week 3 starter. Instead, he has now opened the door for a switch to Daniel Jones. Now, we will see if that actually happens. In that Superflex League where I was telling you about, I am actually trying to get Daniel Jones for as cheap as possible. To possibly be my number 2 quarterback, if he so happens to actually take over. I am one of those that I am not as down on Daniel Jones as a lot of people are. I still think that it was a good pick for the Giants. I think that he can be a solid quarterback. Now, what he has done so far in the season has not been stellar. In the little bit of time that he has gotten, has dealt with some fumbles, missed snaps, a lot of rookie stuff. So we'll see if that's stuff that he can overcome, if he gets a shot to play a little more often. So I think that he's going to be solid eventually down the line. He may need to take the lumps, right? And right now, with the Giants being 0-2, I see no reason, maybe give another start to Eli, and if they, lose another one, I'd say at that point move over to Daniel Jones. So definitely something to keep an eye on. If Daniel Jones does become the starter, I don't think he may become a better option than Eli Manning is in like a Superflex league, maybe in 2 quarterback leagues. But I'm not totally convinced that that's, it's kind of up in the air. So in terms of other stories, like I talked about with the, how we call this the Infirmary report, there's lots of injuries. So I'm going to kind of do a blow through these. There's some other stuff mixed in here in terms of other headlines that we wanted to cover, but Minkah Fitzpatrick has been traded to Pittsburgh for a first-round pick, so he will now be safety/corner, whatever, in Pittsburgh. They definitely need to work on their defense, and so that's where they're going there. It looks like, at least for now, they're sticking with Mason Rudolph as the quarterback, and probably won't have a first-round pick this next year. Trevor Siemian is down. In terms of the Jets quarterbacks, it's just not looking pretty. Trevor Siemian went down. It looked like it's probably a broken ankle, and at this point is probably, my guess is going to go on IR. Luke Falk came in and is now going to be the starter for the remaining time that Sam Darnold is out with mono. And so he is not an option really that I think that you should go for in terms of the waiver wire if you're desperate for a quarterback. Again, it would have to be like a 16-team super flex or something like I'm in, where I might have no choice but to pick up a Luke Falk. But for the most part, I'm not going that direction. Poor Le'Veon Bell. That's really going to hurt him. David Njoku is in the concussion protocol. He got a nasty hit, kind of upended in midair while going up for a pass, came down, hit his head pretty hard. So he is most likely, I believe he actually has a concussion, is going to be in the concussion protocol. We'll see if he can play next week. Jalen Ramsey has requested a trade from the Jacksonville Jaguars after a altercation with his coach and just a poor showing this last week by the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Texans. Michael Gallup has a torn meniscus, I believe is what it is. Looking like it's going to be about a month that up to a month that he is going to miss. He's going to have a small surgery to trim his meniscus a little bit. I believe he got a helmet to the knee is what happened there. So he should be good to go in about 4 weeks or so. James Conner is day-to-day with a knee, no torn, nothing, no structural damage. We'll just kind of see how he's doing. Might be a good time to pick up Jalen Samuels if he's available, just to, as a precaution. Alshon Jeffrey is day-to-day with the calf strain, having basically been non-existent in this last game, last night in the Monday Night Football game, and now having another game in 7 days or so. This is not exactly a great spot for him to be in, so we'll see how he can handle this. Antonio Brown is looking at a possible fine for avoiding the media. There's been another woman who has come forward saying that she has been sexually assaulted by Antonio Brown. He avoided the media and in doing so, I believe violates part of the collective bargaining agreement. And so he is, probably likely looking at a fine from the NFL. Devin Singletary is day-to-day with his hamstring injury. Luckily, it's not anything worse than that, but hammies are always going to be interesting to come back from. So there's that. LaShawn McCoy had an MRI on his ankle, and Damian Williams has a knee contusion. So the two starting running backs for the Chiefs are a little bit banged up. We will see how neither one of them is necessarily expected to miss any time, but definitely something to keep an eye on for moving into this next week against Baltimore. All right, like I said, there was a ton of injuries. We are now going to take a quick little commercial break and move on into our waiver wire madness for the week.
Waiver Wire Madness.
All right, so we are moving into the waiver wire. The basic rule that we use for this is that any player that we mention has to be owned in less than 50% of either Yahoo or ESPN leagues. I generally use Yahoo. I am not a big fan of the ESPN platform. For those of you who are, you can check to kind of cross-reference to see where these guys are in terms of their ownership if they are available in your leagues. So here we go. To start off with the quarterbacks, Josh Allen versus Cincinnati. He is 41% owned. I like Josh Allen for this week as a quarterback to pick up. Over the last couple weeks, he has had about 250 yards passing, thrown for a touchdown in each of those games. Has run for a touchdown, I believe, also in both of those games. And has really been playing very solid for the most part. Yet he did have the 4 turnovers the first week against the Jets. But both these games were away, actually playing in the same stadium in MetLife against both the New York teams, winning them both. He now gets a home game against Cincinnati. I like him this next week against Cincinnati. Cincinnati's defense got absolutely torn apart by San Francisco. And so I think that Josh Allen should be in for a pretty good game this next week against Cincinnati and would be a solid pickup for those of you who lost Ben Roethlisberger this week, or if you lost Drew Brees and need a quarterback. My number 2 quarterback that I am on for this next week, it's mainly because of the matchup, is Jacoby Brissett. He is at home against Atlanta. He has played somewhat solid over the last few games, or last couple games, sorry. 21 completions, 190 yards, and 2 touchdowns in week 1. 17 completions, 146 yards, and 3 touchdowns with an interception in week 2 against Tennessee. For the most part, he's playing pretty good. He also adds the running aspect to his game, like Josh Allen does. And so I think that he is a solid enough play as a streaming quarterback. I don't think he's an every week starter. Playing at home, I think that this is an okay matchup for him. Atlanta has struggled a little bit on the road. So this is a game I think that could set up pretty decent for Jacoby Brissett to have a streamable game. Again, you want about 202 or 250-2 is about what you're looking for in a streaming quarterback. Or if they can run the ball a little bit, 202 with a couple of with 25 to 50 rushing yards, you're in great shape. That quarterback is not going to lose you a week doing that. And I think Jacoby Brissett could possibly put up that kind of a week against Atlanta at home. So those are my 2 quarterback pickups for this week. Moving on to the running backs. The running back waiver wire. We start off with Mr. Jalen Samuels. And the reason that I'm starting off with him, even though he's lesser owned than the next guy on the list, is because of the fact that James Conner's knee is being a little bit iffy, I guess you could say. They actually took him out, I want to say, for most of the second half of this last game. Jalen Samuels had 3 rushes for 18 yards, caught 1 target for 13 yards against the Seahawks on Sunday. Let's not forget what Jalen Samuels was able to do last year. Now, again, I understand they had AB, they had Ben, and so Jalen Samuels could be a little bit more of that weapon that they needed. But he put up some decent numbers last year when he was forced into the lead role. I think that he's probably a better receiving back than James Conner is. Maybe not quite as good of a running back, running between the tackles and stuff. But I think that he is, if he becomes the starter, I think that he could put up some solid numbers, even against San Francisco's defense at San Francisco. So Jalen Samuels, I think, is a guy that is a potential pickup, especially if James Conner goes down. Because, again, for the most part, the Steelers don't use multiple running backs. And the fact that Jalen Samuels can be used in the passing game is definitely a plus. The next running back is Chris Thompson. He is going to be the main receiving back for the Redskins. And as far as the Redskins go, they're going to be playing in catch-up mode a lot. Playing against Chicago is a tough defense. If they're going to get anything moving, it may have to go through Chris Thompson in the passing game with Case Keenum. I want to say through 2 games so far, Chris Thompson has 18 targets. So he's getting about 9 targets a game. I want to say it's been 10 and 8 in the last couple games. He is going to be targeted in the PPR game. He is going to have pretty solid numbers. He's going to get used. I think he's a flex play, kind of that RB3 flex play that is could be a good matchup if you need the extra help, if you're dealing with some injuries or stuff. Next on the list, we're going a little bit deeper here. Mr. Darwin Thompson. Again, the reason I bring up Thompson is because of the fact that both LaShawn McCoy and Damian Williams, having some injury issues. We don't know how severe those are. So, again, by the time you're listening to this, we may have a little more information on what's going on with the 2 of them. Darwin Thompson is really just in case those 2 are injured. If you have an already solid running back core, you don't necessarily need to pick up Darwin Thompson. Again, you need to wait a little bit to see what's going to be going on there. So, I would wait. If you're desperate, I would go Darwin Thompson to see what you can do there. Moving on, the next one, Raheem Mostert, 17% owned, going up against Pittsburgh this next week. The thing I like about Mostert is he tends to be a little bit more of the pass-catching guy. 3 catches for 63 yards in this last game. Ran 13 times for 83 yards. I love the way he runs. I love the way he plays. I understand that Breida is going to be the main rusher in the offense for San Francisco, but I like the way that Mostert plays, especially catching the ball out of the backfield. He runs hard. Last year he suffered the brutal arm break when he kind of had to take over the offense. And then suffers that nasty broken arm and misses. Has to go on IR and misses half the season or so. I definitely like him for this week. It's a little bit tough. He's playing this week, and then he has a bye in week 4, so that's one thing to watch for. But I think that if you can get him, if you're desperate for some running back work, Mostert, I think, could get a decent amount of work in this game against Pittsburgh coming up this next week. And the last but not least of my suggested ads, Mr. Frank Gore, old man himself. And this is more because of the fact that that Devin Singletary is dealing day-to-day with the hamstring injury. Last week against the Giants, Frank Gore put up 15.3 fantasy points, 19 attempts, 68 yards, had a touchdown. Now, again, that could just be because the Giants are a really crappy defense. Cincinnati got absolutely torn up by San Francisco. Raheem Mostert being one of those guys. Matt Breida ran for a ton of yards. So Frank Gore could be in for a solid game. I think he's a solid pickup. Again, if you're dealing with some injury issues, if you're in a deeper league, I think that Frank Gore could be a solid pickup for you for this week. Moving on to the wide receivers. Number one that I have, again, and this is owned in 50% of leagues and less, is Mr. DK Metcalf. In 2 games, Metcalf has, I believe, 150 yards and a touchdown. Let me pull it up real quick. 150 yards and a touchdown, 13 targets, 7 receptions. Now you may be saying, well, that's not a lot of targets. True, but in Seattle's offense, they use the wide receivers mostly in play action. They've allowed Russell Wilson to throw the ball a bit more this season in these last couple games. And when they've done that, kind of moved into sort of a hurry-up offense type of thing, Metcalf has definitely benefited. Now, he only had 3 catches in this last game, but 3 for 61 and a touchdown. Russell likes throwing to him. He's gone up 12% in the last day in terms of ownership. So he was only owned in 37%, about a third of leagues. He has gone up already a bunch. So he is definitely a hot commodity right now that I think if you can get him to add to your wide receiver depth, he is a great guy to pick up because I think this is going to continue. New Orleans has struggled a bit. They've given up the 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position so far. Next on the list is Mecole Hardman. Now, the thing about Hardman is you are dealing with a guy that you don't know how much production he's going to get. This next week is not the easiest matchup. Again, they're going up against Baltimore. Baltimore has been absolutely playing lights out. Let's not forget that Baltimore had their 2 games against Miami, who is an atrocious offense, and this past week against Arizona, who's struggling to find their identity in this air raid system with the rookie quarterback in Kyler Murray. I think that Hardman could put up solid numbers. You've got Sammy Watkins, who goes off for 190 some yards and 3 touchdowns, I believe, in week 1. You had Demarcus Robinson, who went off for 170 some odd yards and 2 touchdowns in week 2. Hardman went 4 for 61 and a touchdown in week 2 as well against Oakland, and actually had a 70-yarder called back for offensive holding. So he is just as explosive. He is very much that Tyreek Hill clone, Tyreek Hill type that I actually like better than Demarcus Robinson, and a lot of people like better than Demarcus Robinson. So I think he could be the guy that blows up this week instead of Demarcus Robinson again. So he's kind of my pick to go with this next week. He's already 40% owned in Yahoo. So, again, just another guy to watch for. Could be another depth piece. Maybe not have such a great game this week, but the next couple weeks he goes up against Detroit, Indianapolis, and Houston, all teams that have been giving up a lot of pass yards. So, Indianapolis hasn't been giving up as many, but they haven't been necessarily going up against prolific pass offenses either. Next, at 24% owned, Mr. Randall Cobb. Going up against Miami this week. The reason I add Cobb on here is because of the injury to Michael Gallup. Now, I understand that they've got another guy that they've brought in. Was it Devin Smith, I believe, is the guy who had a pretty decent game. I like Cobb more personally. I think that Dak Prescott, for the most part, has done a good job of finding the slot guy. He's had 11 targets out of the slot in the last 2 games, Randall Cobb has. 4 catches, 69 yards and a touchdown, 5 catches for 24 yards. It's more of a PPR play, to be completely honest. It's a flex PPR play. In deeper leagues, if you have 2 flexes playing in 12 teams and more, I think that Randall Cobb is definitely someone that you can add to your roster to fill in bye weeks, and if you're dealing with some injuries, need some extra depth. Moving on, DJ Chark versus Tennessee this week, 13% owned. Over 2 weeks, he has had 13 targets, 11 receptions for, 201 yards and 2 touchdowns. Westbrook, when Foles went down, it really killed Westbrook's value. I think that D.D. Westbrook is droppable right now. Gardner Minshew prefers DJ Chark to throw to. I mean, we saw that with 9 targets, 7 receptions, and 55 yards and a touchdown. I think that's going to continue. So as long as Gardner Minshew is the quarterback, DJ Chark is going to be the wide receiver to own. He has a questionable tag so far. He was a limited participant in practice. I don't believe they actually practiced today because of the because they're playing on Thursday, so they did a little bit of a walkthrough. They're really going light on practices this week with the Thursday game. Both Tennessee and Jacksonville, I believe, are holding a lot of people out in practice this week. So something to watch for, but I think that he should be okay. Again, he's only 13% owned. So, again, if you need some wide receiver depth, DJ Chark is definitely named to go. And the last but not least, the star of the week this past week, Demarcus Robinson, 7% owned. Again, went 6 receptions for 172 yards and 2 TDs. Again, I think Baltimore's defense is going to be much better than what Oakland was. The reason I'm hesitant on Demarcus Robinson is if you go the week before, he only has 2 targets, 1 reception for 0 yards. Same with Mecole Hardman. He had 1 target and didn't even have a catch in week 1. So it's kind of an up and down, back and forth on who's actually going to be the number 2 in Kansas City. I prefer Mecole Hardman. I think he's the better wide receiver. Demarcus Robinson is, does have a little bit more veteran status. So I prefer Hardman. I don't necessarily Demarcus Robinson doing the same thing against Baltimore this week. So moving on to the tight end position. At tight end, my number 1 pickup for this week is going to be Vernon Davis. And the reason for that is he is still he's going to be in there. Jordan Reed is dealing with injury issues. I don't like Jordan Reed. If Jordan Reed plays, you're not going to pick up Vernon Davis. He's not going to be usable. However, Jordan Reed can't seem to get healthy, which is why Vernon Davis is going to be continually used. And I think against Chicago's defense, they've struggled a little bit against tight ends so far this year. And so I think that Vernon Davis could put up at least solid, streamable numbers as a tight end for this week in week 3. Again, he's only 29% owned, so he's pretty widely owned. He's a guy that I think, again, can put up streamable numbers against the Chicago defense. With how their defense is playing, the Chicago defense is playing, Case Keenum's going to be forced to throw the ball a lot, I think. I don't think they're going to be able to trust on the run, and so that could mean a lot of dump-offs, again, to Thompson out of the backfield and to Vernon, and crossing routes and dump-offs to Vernon Davis. So could, again, put up a streamable week. Number 2 is Jason Witten, 15% owned. In 2 weeks, 4 targets and 4 targets, 3 catches, 4 catches, a total of 40 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is an option for Dak Prescott. Jason Witten, 2 years ago, before Witten retired and started working on Monday Night Football, Dak Prescott found Jason Witten a lot. He used him as a security blanket. I think the Witten's getting more comfortable and therefore doesn't necessarily need Witten. But again, he's finding Witten, 4 targets a game. Not a whole lot, but it's streamable. It's not a 0. in a full point PPR, 6 points, 6.5 points, if he doesn't get the touchdown, still a solid week from a streamable tight end. It's not going to lose you your week. So, and I don't think he's going to continue this pace, tight end, a touchdown every week. But Jason Witten, again, he's a streamable option, especially this week going up against the ineptitude of Miami's defense. Last but not least, Will Dissly, the tight end out of Seattle. 5 targets, 5 receptions, 50 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, Justin and I talked about this in our Kings and Stings episode yesterday. And the thing about Will Dissly is he is not necessarily going to be the number 1 receiving option, usually. For the most part, in the middle of the field, that's going to be Nick Vannett. However, Will Dissly gets used a lot because of his blocking ability, gets used a lot in the red zone, which is where he's seen a lot of his targets, which is also why he had 2 touchdowns in this last game. So Dissly's not going to get a ton of targets. He's going to be, again, in that secondary receiver option for Seattle, where it's going to be like 3 to 4 targets a game. He may get 5 targets a game again. Against New Orleans, I don't necessarily see that happening. It could happen. So, and with some of their defensive backs, Will Dissly could be a solid play this week against a streamable option. Only 4% owned, so he's very widely available. Could be a guy to have in your lineup as a streamable option to see where it goes. Last but not least, the defense and special teams pickups of the week. Number 1. I have to pick up, again, this have to be owned in less than 50% of leagues, and all the other ones that are owned in less than 50% don't necessarily have all that favorable of a matchup. So for me, I'm going number 1 is San Francisco versus Pittsburgh. San Francisco balled out defensively this last week against Cincinnati. Played pretty solid. Well, played pretty solid defense. They were really good against Jameis Winston, but everybody seems to be good playing defense against Jameis Winston. I think that with Pittsburgh going into San Francisco and having a backup quarterback, I think that San Francisco may be able to tee off a little bit, and could provide solid streamable value from the defense against Pittsburgh this week. So, again, San Francisco is one that I think could be a solid option for this week. And number 2, only owned in 1% of leagues, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, you may be thinking I'm crazy picking them as defense. However, against San Francisco, they only actually gave up 19 points. Half of San Francisco's points in that game were pick sixes off of Jameis Winston. They gave up 19 points, but had a sack, had an interception, had a fumble recovery, had the interception came back for a touchdown. And then against Carolina, only gave up 12 points, had 3 sacks, had a fumble recovery, scored 9 points in defense. Going up against the New York Giants, who have really struggled offensively. I mean, Saquon Barkley has put up okay numbers, but not great. I think that this could be a solid option for a defense to stream, or could be a kind of a lottery ticket type of defense for DFS this week. So again, it's not your usual pick for but it's a streamable option, only 1% owned. I think could be a deep pick that could pay off for you this week. So that is it for the waiver wire and for the waiver wire madness for this week. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to the show. Again, make sure to hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on YouTube or Apple, Castbox, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you're listening to us. We would really appreciate it. Again, hit that subscribe button. Share us out with all your friends and family. Spread the fantasy love. Again, my name is Ryan Skullroot, and we will talk to you guys later. Hey, SkullKing Nation. Thank you for listening to the SkullKing Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.